everybody. I'm Jo Hickey Hall, and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. And today I have with me a wonderful guest, Danu, wise woman, author, and teacher. And so your books have inspired so many of us, and I'm going to run just through a few of them now. Wild Magic, which is a real practical, helpful guide to anybody that is interested in Celtic folk traditions. The Magical Year, Celtic Tree Magic, and you brought out an oracle fairly recently, Celtic Goddesses, Witches and Queens. Thank you for creating that.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, so welcome. And the reason that we kind of got in contact in the first place is because very recently, one of your books in particular was one that myself and my community, the Modern Fairy Sightings, became very interested in, which was the book about Gwyn ap Neath. We've just had a discussion about the pronunciation of this because it's spelled Nudd,
Yeah,
but it's pronounced
Neath.
Neath.
Neath. The double D
Neath.
is a
Yes.
the sort of sound. I'm not a native Welsh speaker, so no doubt they will correct me. But
Yes.
the further north you go, it seems to be more like Gwynab and Neath. Or
Gwyn ap.
Neath. There's a kind of a front of the mouth thing going on.
Yeah.
Gwynab Neath will do.
Gwyn ap Neath. So yeah, thank you for joining, first of all,
My
and
pleasure.
for creating that book, because we had a number of episodes which centered around this character. So I'm really interested, first of all, to kind of hear from you how this understanding and relationship with Gwyn ap Nudd came around.
Mm. Well, I think I've been aware of him. I've lived in Glastonbury for 23 years,
Mm.
and I was aware of him for several years before that. So that would take me, oh gosh, that would probably take me to kind of the late 90s, I guess. And at that point, I understood that he was a king of the fairies that lived in Glastonbury Tor. But I wasn't so hot on my research at that point and at that age. That was quite a long time ago. Um, but I was always really drawn to this landscape, and I've always had a very close relationship with spirits in the other world and things like this. My whole family have always seen spirits. So I felt like I had a connection with him, even as a very young woman, actually. It took a while for me to kind of name who it was that I was connecting with. But it kind of evolved into, okay, I think this is Gwyn ap Neath. And he was very instrumental in me moving to Glastonbury. So Glastonbury is one place that's related to Gwyn ap Neath from the life of St. Cothlin, which is a kind of medieval Welsh saint. But he's also associated with the Black Hills in Wales and numerous sites in Wales as well. So we have to remember that he's a Brythonic god as well, or a lord of Annwn, perhaps. That's perhaps the most accurate way to put it.
Mm.
So he called me to live in Glastonbury as part of a kind of an initiatory process in my life, where I just kind of became far more empowered. I'd kind of got to my kind of, not quite my late 20s, but I was kind of a bit lost, and I wasn't very empowered, I guess. And I moved to Glastonbury and almost immediately began kind of writing an awful lot more. I'd always kind of been working in kind of covens and spiritual groups and things, but I began leading things and leading workshops. And within a year, I'd been invited to teach a fairy workshop at the Green Gathering Festival.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's the first like public, rather than like a little kind of group of people getting together to celebrate the win of the year or something. This was have a ticket, come and teach about fairies and Celtic fairy tradition. And I was quite nervous, but I got pushed by my friends. No, you know about this. Go do it. Go do it. And I was expecting 3 people in a tent, and I had this big marquee, and I walked in, and the entire place was packed.
Wow.
and I was terrified. And I took a breath, and I had to get. I hadn't planned where I was going to sit or anything, and it was this big circular kind of space. And I just felt him there with
Oh,
me, like this big male presence behind me. And I just stopped and stood there, and I just breathed for a moment. And I walked my way to the center. And a few people realized that I would be the person running this, so they moved out
mm,
of the way for me. And I lit a candle in the center, and I just took a breath. And I just waited until my heart stopped pounding enough
yeah,
to kind of get my thoughts together. And it worked amazingly. I introduced people to the other world, and I introduced them to Gwyn Neath, and people had well, it was extraordinary. At one point, I was getting people to just breathe, and I treated myself to counting how many people were in the marquee, and there was 89 people.
blimey.
And my first ever public teaching. And it was terrifying. But I just
Yeah.
kept breathing. And people had experiences. One person named their son because they met their son in the other world
Oh my goodness.
whilst
Yeah.
their partner was pregnant. They came up and they said, I've met my son, and he's told me what his name should be,
Oh,
and things like this. And it was all,
mm,
I just felt Gwyn Neath there the whole time. Every time I was getting anxious or being unsure what to say, I just felt this steady presence, and I just took a breath. And afterwards, people said, You've never done any teaching before. You were so powerful. It was so graceful. You walked in like, and I wasn't walking in like a priestess at all. I was just dealing with my panic.
yeah. Yeah.
So, but basically, he turned me from this kind of rather scatty, sort of fairy, hippie young woman into somebody that owned the space,
Yeah.
knew my shadow, and began to understand how to hold my power and hold my knowledge and use it in a way that was more focused. So I owe him a huge amount. I owe him a
Mm,
huge amount. And I've been in a kind of relationship with him as one of my patron deities
yes.
ever since. Ever since. And he teaches an awful lot about knowing yourself, really knowing yourself, knowing your shadow, all of that
Mm,
kind of thing. But as a way to become stronger, become more whole, I don't know if many people know much about him in the Welsh traditions, but he's very much well, he's described as a Lord of Annwn, which is the Welsh Otherworld, the deep
yes.
place. And in the Welsh traditions, when you enter Annwn, you have initiatory experiences
Hmm.
that hopefully you come through and have some inner treasure from. And I just feel like I owe him a great deal of gratitude because I feel like he's done that for me repeatedly over the years. And it's not always been easy, but he's helped me transform in ways that I wouldn't have believed were possible when I look back at my sort of 26-year-old self at all.
This, yeah, I think this is the kind of thing that is missing from a lot of people's lives these days, and these kind of traditions where you
Mm,
can interconnect with these beings from any, no matter what kind of faith, religion you
absolutely.
have, it really, that's kind of almost, not the important part, but the important part is that you feel a resonation
Mm.
and a connection with a being that can then, or a deity, I should say, a god or
I
goddess,
don't know
lord or
what you'd call
lady.
them. You could call
Well,
them a
this is
deity,
it.
but I mean, I've spent quite a long time debating whether or not that would even be the right word.
It's
So,
kind of like it's a representation, maybe,
mm,
of something that I've been listening to over the last couple of days, which has really moved me, and I'm really keen to share this with you, and I feel it fits into all of this. If we look at uh, Gwyn ap Nudd as, we could sort of see him as, say, like a Hades character,
mm,
in the underworld, and you have different representations of that kind of being or deity or god or goddess or lord or lady, as I say, in all types of religions, faiths, and practices. But something that I was listening to, which was an interview between Patrick Harper, author of Demonic Reality, and Bernardo Kastrup. And in the course of that conversation, and it was through something that the actual host himself introduced, was this idea of, apparently it's from a Nordic tradition, although they couldn't actually pin it down in the interview, so I'm still looking into this, that there's a sense that throughout our lives, we have these initiations, as you say. Now, some of that is kind of spiritual initiation, where I think it's something that calls you, it can call you at different times in your lives, but it's where you then go on some kind of spiritual journey and you understand the world in a different way and you connect with the kind of higher aspects and you seek within, but it's in a kind of, it's kind of on a more sort of higher vibrational plane, if you want to use those sorts of words. And then you have what's called this at some point as well, and these could take place either way around, the soul journey, which is where you go in to the
Mm,
depths. And
yeah.
this now, our our understanding of religious belief in today's society, and going back to religious reformations and religion kind of way back, really, when religion when religious movements started to introduce this sense of good and evil, then they're
Mm,
actually cutting off the soul part, the part
yeah.
that is represented by Gwyn Neath, the part that is
Mm,
represented by Hades. But it is those parts, those initiative parts of our lives where we go down into the depths, into the darkness, but we get something within that which is a treasure. And that is sometimes the most powerful, transformational parts of it. Sets out the rest of our lives and
yeah.
continues to do so in many different ways. But I think it strikes me, and again, it's back to this idea of that we've been separated from the divine, but it's the part of the divine that has been, that we've been cut off from, which does often dwell in the shadows.
Mm,
And so this sense of reconnecting with figures like Gwyn at this time when we're going through a big shift in the world, I believe, as well,
mm,
sort of, global consciousness going through a real kind of soul searching, and you can see that.
yeah.
So I'm interested in that side of things and the way that maybe people may be put off. So for instance, you were talking about the way that you were initially called to
Mm,
Gwyn Neath, and I'd like to ask you in a moment whether that came through certain images or dreams or symbols or signs in some way, as long as it feels okay to share
mm,
that. Because I think that sometimes when people get on that road, they're a bit scared off if they encounter
yeah.
something that's a bit, oh, I'm not sure about this.
Yeah.
This must be bad. And they back away because that's what we've been taught. But
Yeah.
actually, we need to, this is where it's know yourself,
Yes. Yeah,
because
exactly.
then you find it within yourself to interact.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you think about that?
I've become aware over the years that yeah, that place is where people stop. It's the first challenge. And you find it with fairy, either in a you meet a challenge and you run away, or you are um you're shown something equally easy instead, and you accept
Mm,
that and you stop there. Either way, you stop there. Um, Whereas my experiences with Gwyn Neath and with the people that I've taught and worked with over the years, I encourage people to really feel into and unpack their experiences with him. I think with all spirits, and like this comes from kind of my family background a little bit. I mean, they wouldn't necessarily call themselves seers or anything like that, but if you talk to them, they've all got stories. They've all got
yeah.
stories about things that they've seen and things that they've known ahead of time and all sorts of stuff. And it's always been kind of rather messy and chaotic. It's not like they're not like a trained
Mm,
order of people or anything like that. It's purely just a kind of family knowing kind of stuff.
yeah.
But the difference between what you can see and how it feels, you know, that's the difference. Is that is you got to kind of have something in yourself that can help you navigate, that be present enough to yourself to be able to feel what you're experiencing in that moment and be able to trust yourself a little bit to push
Yeah.
against these things, you know? So it's kind of, I always say with all forms of spirit, we have to go as independent travelers. We have to encounter these things with as much knowledge as we can gain beforehand, but the ability to stand there in that encounter and feel what's going on, not just be led by the imagery that something presents to us or
Mm.
something like that, you know, have
Yeah.
something deeper that we're bringing to unpack. And maybe we step away, but then maybe later on we step forward again, you know.
Mm.
My encounters with Gwyn Neath have been all sorts. Um, Sometimes I've had little flashes of vision. Uh, Sometimes I've encountered him in ritual spaces and in kind of, hedge riding, spirit walking kind of practices.
Mm.
Other times I've just felt him there as a presence. And over the years, I feel all sorts of presences over the years, and just in the same way as you could be, I don't know, washing up at the sink, and somebody in your family walks in the room, and you know who it is. You don't have to turn around.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
necessarily even a psychic sense. The footfall, the space being occupied by somebody, you know if it's your child or it's your partner, you know
Yeah.
that kind of thing. I just I know when he turns up. I know his vibe, you know.
Yeah.
And other times I have very powerful dreams. I've been guided a lot by very powerful dreams. In some ways, those have been the places where the deepest stuff has been unpacked,
Mm.
where I've had to well, I haven't had to do anything. This is the thing, you see. I don't think they demand much. You either engage or you don't engage, and
Yeah.
that's down to you. It's your journey that you're on. I feel like with Gwyn Neath, he likes to see me become stronger. He likes to see me stand. One of the things he does that he's always done with me, I'm somebody who's naturally relatively shy, but as I've matured in life, I've become more effective in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't mean to say I'm not still quite shy, but it doesn't. I can engage quite happily, and I enjoy talking to people, and I enjoy things like this.
Mm.
But one thing that he would do with me, he did it a lot when I was younger, is I would feel him grab my chin and lift my head up.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Mm.
what that says, what that says on its own, is really educational about myself
Yeah.
and about what he would like to see from me. And it's not been, you must do this, Danu, or else,
Mm.
or blah, blah, blah. There's no been kind of big, kind of, on high declarations at all. It's been a sequence of head up, straight back, you know?
Yes.
I had lots of dreams that were, I still, when I encounter him in dreams, these days, I feel like our relationship has changed quite a lot because I feel like I know him quite well.
Mm.
And he will test the boundaries sometimes. And what has the right thing to do has been for me has been to go, well, I'll do that, but I won't do that. And to hold my own. Not this is a God, I must do as I'm told. Instead come in as a fully empowered, mature woman and go, well, no. And then he'll laugh and he'll be like, yeah, okay, it's like it's tests. It's
Yes.
and tests can be quite irritating actually. And it's all right to go, that's irritating. Or I don't want to go on that wild goose chase, or, you know, whatever. But other
Mm.
times it will be absolute gold. But what he's taught me is to own my own power. I had lots of dreams that were Gwyn Neath dreams where he was pointing out to me, how can I explain this best? He was pointing out to me the difficulties of being a young woman in the world, put it that way,
Right.
encountering things like misogyny and poorly behaved males and things like that,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I was a younger woman, and the the lesson that I had to draw from it was accepting that actually I was quite angry. I was quite angry at that feeling of prey to unscrupulous male energy.
Yes.
not just in any sort of particular individual trauma way, but in a kind of collective way
Yes.
as well. And and I accessed my anger and I accessed my pushback in a way that I simply did not have before, actually. And as I did that more in dreams, I found I did that more in the world. And I'm not kind of somebody I work with goddesses and things like that a lot, but I'm not somebody who's particularly focused on that issue as an individual.
No, yeah.
But it was exactly the first unpicking and unpacking of my dark materials, the things I needed to
Yes.
work through to find my power in the world, how to be myself, but also engaging with the world as it is.
Yes.
And that was a big lesson for me. And he was the one that taught me that by being this big male, quite intimidating presence. And I
Mm.
kind of felt like if I could stand up to him, then I
Yeah.
could deal with life. But he liked that.
Yeah.
It's a strange one. I'm not saying everybody else's experiences would be the same. That was my
Sure.
stuff that I needed to work with. And since then other things have come along. So I've always found
Yes.
him to be, sometimes he's warning me about my own internal stuff, and sometimes he's pointing out things about the world to me. But and sometimes he's just checking in and going, oh, you should mention fairy more, or you should write this book.
Yeah.
When I wrote the Gwyn Neath book, I had a
Mm.
dream where I was sat in a posh restaurant and he handed over a contract. And I was looking through the contract, going, well, this or that. And I woke up and was like, oh, but I was negotiating the contract. I wasn't, you shall do this for me. It was, Danu, I would like you to do this. And the back and forth.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing with fairy, and that's the thing with the Celtic gods,
Yes.
that we're not their children. We They want us ideally to come to it from a more empowered perspective, whether they're gods or fairies or spirits or, you know,
Mm.
local gods, genii loci, any of those things, however we define that. For me, the journey is about becoming more myself in
Most
that. And from
definitely.
that, I can be more useful. I can be of more service to the world.
Yeah. I love hearing that that's how, and I have the book here, that's how this was written.
Yeah,
It's, yeah, it's amazing to hear this. And I think, you know, because you've got practical advice within the book, there's practical exercises for people to connect with Gwyn and with some other characters in the story and other kind of essences of this world and this universe that we're living in. And so, it takes you step by step, practical exercises, meditations, and encourages, things like dream work too, so that then we can have our own meetings and encounters. And I think that was very helpful to some people that I spoke to
oh, good.
who had, yeah, myself included, who had had encounters with what is known kind of generally as the dark man. Do
Yes.
you relate, Gwyn, yourself to the dark man? Do you see him an as part of this kind of archetype of the dark man, or is it something related or something different?
Yes and no. Do you know what
Hmm.
Gwyn means? Gwyn means kind of whiteness or brightness.
Yes.
It means blessedness, really.
Mm.
Everything that's kind of Gwyn, like Guinevere, means kind of white phantom or kind of blessed lady spirit from the other world, King Arthur's wife, you know?
Yes.
The idea,
Yeah.
the concept of Gwyn in the Brythonic traditions is this radiance. It
Yeah.
implies some kind of otherworldly radiance.
Or glowingness. It made me think of
Glowing.
the kind of the shining ones, the
Exactly.
she. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Um,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, like what we know about him from the kind of medieval literature and the life of St. Coughlin and various other bits and pieces,
Yeah.
is that he was tasked with um, kind of guarding over the demons of Annwn,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, and stopping them getting out is the
Mm.
kind of the Christianized version of this.
Right.
When you think about that, so this being that is luminous in some way, is tasked with being a lord over the underworld, or the prisoner, the prison guard of the demons, or however you want to see it.
Yes.
It's interesting, the kind of dichotomy between being this luminous being, which implies something very positive, and dealing with this dark matter.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
so in vision, he's always come across as quite dark, and traditionally he's often seen either with a blackened face, or sometimes with antlers, or
Mm.
a lot of people encounter him as somebody with black hair and things like this.
Right.
And me too, actually. Me too. He seems to choose that kind of imagery.
Okay.
But I feel like it's imagery that he
Yeah.
chooses to clothe himself in. I
Hmm.
think what, in my experience, what he would truly look like, I don't think is perhaps even a answerable question. I think all the images are things that he is choosing, in my view. Um,
Yes, that will differ.
Yeah, exactly. And it communicates something that he wants to communicate, or this being wants to communicate. But the idea that of Gwyn being this radiant being, to me, suggests that he guides you through this darkness, you know?
Mm. Yeah, and your own darkness.
Yeah,
Yeah, your own dark.
exactly.
Because
So then that kind of Jungian archetype of the kind of dark man and dark man dreams and things like that,
mm,
that sort of women can encounter, are sort of things that help us process again on a psychological matter, on a
yes.
psychological sort of level. Again, that unpacks something for us too, doesn't it? So
Mm.
the dark man is a very archetypal figure.
Yeah,
I would think that he probably is quite related to that. Yeah.
it seems both with Gwyn and with, what's known as the Dark Man. I should
Yeah.
mention here that Dara Mason of the Spirit Box is bringing out a book called Song of the Dark Man soon. I think it's in September. So I'm looking forward to that. But in all of these kinds of encounters with these dark men and Gwyn, there's a sense of an invitation to transform, a transition of
Oh,
some
yeah.
kind, with that sort of initiation. And and that will have, different repercussions or journeys in different people's lives depending on what they've got going on at the time. But for them it
Yeah.
will be that kind of personal, uh, meaningful to them, and something that they, if they should take it up, will lead to some kind of transformation. Is that kind of how you have sensed him too when you've,
Yeah.
I'm guessing that people write to you about him
They
and
do.
tell you about their own experience? Is
They
that what you
do.
found?
Yes, absolutely.
Mm,
They do. I get written to all the time about Gwyn, probably more than
yeah.
any other deity, or kind of spirit being. And it's quite incredible, the stories that come about for him, how people get stirred by encountering the invitation and the challenge that he represents. You know, um, it is very interesting what happens to people. Whenever I do workshops, or I run a fairy course, and whenever people encounter him there, it's like there's an image of what how he will come across.
Mm,
People will bring all these expectations to. And then once they engage with it, other
yeah.
stuff starts to happen. And it's like well, it is, it's an initiatory experience. It is encouraging us to go into something deeper, and a deeper understanding of ourselves and a deeper understanding of the universe, I think,
Mm, yeah.
in encountering that. But I see him very much as a threshold
Yeah.
guardian.
Yeah.
He's in the traditional law, he works as a psychopomp a lot. And I've
Mm,
worked with him as a psychopomp. He's
mm,
very, very helpful in those kind of ways.
that's
But
good
I
to know.
feel like he's good at kind of consciousness expansion as well.
Yes.
See, I think it's one and the same thing in a way. It's kind of leaving our mortal daily lives, and unpacking something within us that's greater, that is connected to more things. I think that's what he seems to be all about, really. So as within, as above, so below, as within, so without, kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes me, I mean, I love in the book where you talk about St. Coughlin and the way that he's there with his holy water and he sprinkles it, and all of a sudden, he has the traditional way of viewing that is that, St. Coughlin has, in the same way that St. Patrick did with the
Yeah,
serpents, that kind of
yeah,
tale, he has destroyed it, but actually, as your take on it, which I really loved, was that no, he just completely lost that opportunity. He no longer saw what was there. He no longer saw this other world, and he's back on Glastonbury Tor,
yeah,
and he's back in the mortal world, and that has so many, again, connotations with this sense that we are so very much led to just no just concentrate on the mortal world, just concentrate on material. Don't cross that threshold, don't take up that what is being offered in terms of initiatory experience. Just stay here, just look at the things that are, quotes, real. And then we miss this other rich part of life, which is, as I was sort of talking about before, a sense of our soul. And if we look
yeah,
at the way that the world is now, it's so clear that that is exactly what we have lost. We've lost our way, we've lost our soul, and in kind of shooting for everything that is in the light and everything that can be seen and everything that can be um a sort of logical expression of things, we have then lost what is actually fundamental,
yeah,
which doesn't often immediately make sense, but we have to kind of it's a bit harder to make sense of that.
yeah,
So I feel like that story about St. Coughlin was a great indication
yeah,
of that kind of relationship we have
yeah,
with the dark soul. And
yeah,
with Glastonbury itself, so you mentioned before that you've been living there for a long time,
mm,
and I'm in Bristol, so
yeah,
I'm very lucky. I get the chance to go down, not as much as I would like to actually, but I get the chance to go down to Glastonbury and be around there, and it's a very powerful place. But it seems to be of late that people have had these experiences in and around Glastonbury Tor, featuring a figure that could well be Gwyn Neath.
yeah.
So, what do you make of that? What do you think it is about Glastonbury that makes this a place where he seems to dwell? And
Yeah.
do you think that this is something that you've seen an uptick in lately? Because I personally have had lots of people writing to me saying that they have had experiences in and around Glastonbury and with
Mm,
Gwyn Neath.
yeah. I think that it's been going on probably forever, to be honest. But I think that the times we're living in now are particularly pertinent to understanding our underworld and understanding depth. Like you
Yeah.
say about the kind of the soul, our
Yeah.
lives lack a lot of depth at this point. Our
Mm.
connection with the land and with each other, there's a lack of depth going on. And that's Annwn means the deep place. The Welsh
Mm.
underworld means the Brythonic underworld means the deep place.
Yeah.
That place where we're tapping into something. Um, I feel like because I had a long-term relationship with the White Spring in Glastonbury as well. When it first opened, um, it was intended to be a place for multiple religious paths and spiritual paths, all having little shrines in there. And
Ah,
I and my husband Dan, we got asked to do a shrine to Gwyn Neath at the back of the White Spring. And Glastonbury being what it is, it went through various sort of iterations, and in the end, it ended up being us on one side and Bridget on the other.
okay.
And before then, not many people had heard of Gwyn Neath, though people had had experiences um, of this kind of figure that they maybe understood to be the king of the fairies, or they encountered the sense of a large male presence on the tour.
Right. Really?
And
Wow.
that happened a lot. But at that point, when we set up a little shrine to him, and we painted a dolmen arch like kind of like an entrance to a barrow mound,
Yeah.
with the red and white dragons painted on it. It was just
Mm.
painting on the back of the wall, and but the other side of that wall's the tunnels that go into the tour. So we painted the
Right.
entranceway completely black,
Yeah.
so that it was like to use in vision to go into the tour.
Wow.
And it was absolutely incredible. People were traveling all the way across the country to do all sorts of initiations and things like this. And for many years, I ran a specific Gwyn Neath Samhain right in there, introducing people into the underworld to encounter
Amazing.
him through that
Mm,
entranceway. And it was absolutely incredible how people felt this call and then would find out about this place at the White
mm,
Spring and then would come. And it was really exceptional times. It was incredible. And like, times changed and I had to kind of go on to other commitments and motherhood and all sorts of stuff like that.
yeah.
But it was like it was like finally a name was being attached to an experience. And so in my understanding of it with Gwyn ap Neath, his I don't know if the word popularity is true, but people have started to place a name onto their experiences that were on the tour already for a long time.
Right.
I think there was probably a pre-Christian shrine to him or a figure like him on the tour before Christianity came to the town. That's
Yeah.
my belief. There's signs of a Roman shrine up there,
Really?
and Roman, yeah, archaeologically, that's a fact.
Hmm.
The remains of one, and nobody quite knows who that was to. If
Okay.
there was a Roman era shrine, there was probably that it could have been a Romano-Celtic shrine
Hmm.
to, if not Gwyn, perhaps a similar figure. I don't know.
Yeah.
At this point, it's conjecture, but I feel like it's always
Mm,
had that role to play.
yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and the last few years, of course, I think we can't underestimate the effects of the pandemic and
Mm,
the stressful years people have been under
hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
to give rise to their need to deal with their dark materials, to go through their
Mm,
underworld initiations, to find depth again, and to resolve all the stuff that's bubbling up
mm.
of various kinds.
Sure.
So I feel
Yeah.
like we're in a particularly pertinent era for the need for what he does. So I feel like perhaps it has been a gradual building over some time. I don't feel like I've been alive long enough. No. One thing I know is that uh we're pinning the tail on the donkey here
Mm,
with this kind of subject. But it seems to me that actually it's been a kind of a gradual uptick over a long time, but a figure that people regularly encountered on the tour, in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, and probably all the way back. I mean, it was written about. Well, the date has gone from my mind right now, but the
okay.
manuscript Cothlin is a very old manuscript, and it was obviously
Yeah.
going on then. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's
So
12th or
yeah,
13th
yeah,
century, wasn't
something
it?
like that,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
I should have the book in front of me. The date has gone, but
I can tell.
but
But
yeah, essentially a
yeah.
long time. And I think Glastonbury is particularly pertinent like that
Yeah.
because I describe it as a psychotropic landscape. I don't think it's the only place where
Mm,
you can encounter Gwyn ap Neath or the other world or Annwn or any of these concepts. I think there's plenty of them around the world. Avalon is another one, of course, for Glastonbury, the idea of Avalon. Avalon can be accessed in many ways and in many places. There are places on the earth where you can it's easier, and somehow the landscape supports
for sure.
you accessing this stuff, but you
Sure.
can access it anywhere. But Glastonbury seems to be one of those particular places. The Irish side of my family, they all come from the Boyne Valley and just
Ah,
opposite
amazing.
Neath and Newgrange, literally just on
Yeah.
the other side of the river. And that's another place where strange things happen. You know,
Yeah. Gosh,
people
what a
encounter something stirring, or they see a figure or a light they can't explain, or it's another window zone, perhaps, I think, to use kind of modern
oh,
balance for these things. You know,
definitely. And it makes me, no wonder this is in your blood because you cannot be, in and around these landscapes and part of these landscapes and not have a sense of it. I think you'd have
mm,
to, so
yeah,
that in itself is quite exciting to
yeah,
hear, I think. The of course the tour itself being a hill and there is this idea, a long held idea that fairies live within these
yeah,
places, and
yeah,
so that
yeah. And of
if
course,
there is
it's
a shrine
hollow.
there,
It is a
yes,
hollow hill.
it's a hollow hill. And I really want to know about the tunnels because I mean
Yeah.
I've heard about these tunnels. And is there still is there firstly, is there access to get into these tunnels anymore? And
Yeah.
secondly, Um, you know, if not, why not then? But what is in there? Because surely there's got to be some secrets in there.
Well, I would absolutely love to go in those tunnels, but I think they are
Yeah.
okay, here's my understanding of this, and I
Okay.
will welcome anyone, have any further information.
Yeah.
It's like gold dust living here for actual real knowledge of these tunnels. There are a few
Yeah.
people that are really, really particularly into it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but my husband's family have lived here for generations,
Really?
hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So what I understand from kind of Glastonbury, word of the street in Glastonbury,
Yeah.
and what I understand from kind of being part of a local family,
Sure.
somewhere in between, and I'm not going to be perfect on this,
Okay.
but geologically speaking, it's an aquifer, the Tor, why
Yes.
it's that shape.
Can
And
you explain, whoops, can you explain
yeah,
what an aquifer
so
is, please?
basically water underneath is pushing up through the rock and everything, and that creates this kind of the typical Tor shape. You
Mm-hmm.
get numerous others around the landscape as well. So it's water coming
Mm-hmm.
up and then filtering back off across the land underneath.
Yes.
Right? And and I'm not a geologist, but that basically creates calcite, which is a crystal, very thin, fine. I think you get selenite in there as well,
Oh,
but
really?
basically a
Right.
very very, very fine stratified crystal.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like little thin crystally flakes, right?
Yes.
And it creates, so inside the Tor, there is pockets of water
Yes.
being pushed up.
Wow.
That's how we get the white spring and the red spring,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Chalice well. That's where the water's coming up. The white spring is the top layer of the water.
Mm-hmm.
So that's rainfall and more modern water. And the red spring is the water pushing that all up,
Oh,
okay?
right.
Coming
Yeah,
from
yeah.
deep underground.
Mm.
But these pockets are lined, literally lined with crystal, right? So
Amazing.
whether it's, I'm imagining, but I'm not sure, but my understanding is that this will be many large pockets
Mm-hmm.
of water
Mm.
lined with crystal rather than a completely hollow space,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that crystal is very, very, very fragile, very fragile. It's like stalactites and
Sure.
stalagmites, you know, it's kind of layer of the minerals from the water creating it.
Mm.
So in that sense, it literally is a glass hill or a crystal castle or however you want to, you know, the old ideas about
Ah, yeah.
Glastonbury Tor being a, you know, an Inniswydrin, you know, the glass castle. It's layered inside with crystal and pockets, probably pockets of space with water. So that's amazing geology. And people who are far more educated on that subject will probably be able to refine that idea. That's a rough pencil sketch of how it
Okay.
works. But the tunnels, um, so the tunnels are, I think they were intentional and very old to do with accessing the water for the
Okay.
town and for living here.
Mm.
I'm a little bit outside now. I'm literally exactly 3 miles from the Tor. So I'm not strictly in the town centre anymore. But basically, to supply the water, all sorts of things have gone on in that landscape to be able to access the water
Mm-hmm.
for the community. But the tunnels, I think they were bricked a little bit, but mostly they were there because they were naturally occurring crystal lined spaces. And quite frankly, over time, they're incredibly dangerous.
Okay.
Just that they ended up not, the brick part of them were not maintained. And of course, the lands, if you're entering a structure that is held up with calcite,
Mm.
it's not somewhere that's load bearing. It's not somewhere that you can walk in
Mm.
effectively without, you know, being incredibly dangerous. You know, the collapse is most likely. So at some point they were bricked off. And then
Okay.
when the White Spring building was built, they were it was built there to access the water. The White Spring water actually comes through from above and over a little bit. They've engineered that in some way. But
Okay.
basically the tunnels that were there um, were bricked off and the building was created in a kind of, again, the kind of natural place to make that water coming off the hill accessible, which I think was kind of Victorian era, something like that. Again, I'm iffy with dates, but around then. So that's the building that the White Spring is in.
Mm.
So basically, at some point, you could physically walk in there, and there are numerous places where the waterboard and things can open lids and get into the spaces in
Really?
between as part of this engineering of the water. But presumably, I mean, I've only kind of peeked into one of those, and they've got kind of modern stuff shoring out that
Okay.
little space.
Yeah.
But to actually explore into further into those spaces, it would be possible if you didn't weigh anything.
Okay.
I think is
Yes.
my understanding of it. It's because it's such fragile, crystalline spaces. But it is crystalline spaces. It's quite incredible when you think about it.
It's fascinating. It
Yeah.
really, really is fascinating. And is the entranceway that you created
Mm.
in that White Spring space, is that still there for people to visit and work with?
Yeah, the wall is there now.
The wall is there.
The it was plastered when we painted it. We had a flat surface.
Uh-huh.
Now it's back to the original brick, but essentially there's still a Gwyn Neath or a horned god space in that corner.
Okay.
And they've blessed them as well. They've honoured our wishes because I got instructions, rare, clear instructions from Gwyn Neath to keep that back wall clear. So not have a
Mm,
shrine against the back wall, have the shrine on the side so
right.
that you could walk through, so that the energy, the spirits, whatever, could walk through. And they've kept that to this day. So it's a clear wall now, rather than when everything in the White Spring gets wet and degrades and things like that. So now it's pure brick, um, old brick, but they've kept the space clear at the bottom. And people still, myself included, sit there and travel in spirit. It feels like a very potent space to me. I mean, that's just my personal connection and my own personal way of dealing with it and working with
Yeah.
it. But it's amazing to know that on the other side of that wall
Yes.
is an entrance to a tunnel in the tor.
Yes. I'm planning to go down there with Amanda Mariamne Radcliffe, who is now around Glastonbury, and we're going to
Mm.
visit there together.
Oh,
And because she works with the White Spring
mm,
and is very aware of its potent power there, but I hadn't realized that there was this access to the tunnels, and I hadn't
mm,
realized, aside from the Tors connection, I hadn't realized the White Spring connection with
mm.
Gwyn ap Neath. So I'm very excited to be going there. Do you ever run kind of courses or workshops down in Glastonbury to connect with
I do
Gwyn?
little bits and pieces. I do more online at the moment, but that's a
Right.
mixture of childcare responsibilities and the
Mm,
last few years being kind of strange for everybody.
sure.
But I'm gradually
Yeah.
beginning to do more and more and more with groups out on the land and renting little spaces and bits and pieces like that. Again, it's just picking up gradually. I'm so busy with my university work as well that it's been a real
Yes.
juggling couple of years. Everything went on hold, and then I feel
Yeah.
like I've put 4 years worth into the last two.
Yeah. Tell me
So
about it.
I'm kind of like, oh, but
Yeah.
actually, yeah, I'm beginning to kind of unpack and unfold things again, actually. But I
Mm,
have been continuously working with groups of people on the tour and in the landscape around. And yeah, I can always be contacted for that kind of thing. Absolutely.
that's
I no
yeah.
longer volunteer at the White Spring. That was quite a long time ago now, but they are a wonderful group of people, and it's a very special and unique place. So, and it's gone through many iterations and will continue to, I'm sure.
Mm,
But yeah, the Gwynedd Neath connection there is very potent, I feel. And it kind of comes down to that red and white thing as well, the kind of red and white dragons, and is the red the feminine and is the white the male, and all that kind of stuff as well, which is another huge subject.
absolutely. That kind of ties in also to this idea of the sense of, connecting with spirit and connecting with soul, because in this
Mm,
discussion I was referring to Ari, and I should say that apparently that had come from this idea had come from Andreas Corneval, or Corneval, Kornevall, who I have made contact with, and I'm going to be chatting to him about it too, because I really want to know where this idea came from. But the sense with that was that once you have had this kind of spiritual initiation, and then
mm,
you go through the kind of soul initiation, that is when you sort of there's a sense that you emerge as the dragon. Now, the serpent energy is something that has been cropping up for
mm,
me personally
mm,
for about a year. and I understand from other people that it's happening for them too. And I thought, well, I've never really had a particular interest in dragons. What is it about dragons? And so this makes sense to me, because the idea, of course, is that you are in balance with all of the elements, that the dragon itself is representative of the fact that, it can walk upon the earth, it can swim, it can fly through the air, and it can breathe fire. So within the dragon, I guess it's sort of saying that
Yeah.
we emerge as these kind of fully completed
Yeah.
and connected with all of the elements. So yeah, the dragon, can you talk a little bit more about that kind of dragon energy, and what you know about that? Because I really know very little, I must
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Well, my angle with it all is very much the kind of Celtic tradition, kind of Celticist kind of way of reading things. I use that. I use that kind of traditional lore to kind of temper my visionary experiences and challenge them.
Mm,
And I kind of one challenges the other, and somewhere in that kind of alchemical mix is kind of what I like to sit with. I enjoy that process. But
yeah.
to me, I understand them as kind of currents of energy on the land quite a lot, but also as currents of energy within us.
Yeah.
And some of the kind of dragon encounters I've had over the years have been the sense of something so much greater than my understanding. It's been really
Mm,
moving,
okay. Yeah.
something really beyond, you know, that leaves me quite breathless to consider. But what I really thinking about Glastonbury and window zones and how we encounter that dragon energy. There's a place called Dinas Emrys in Wales. I don't know if you've ever been.
I
And
haven't been, but yeah, I'm aware of it. Yeah.
that's another place that has that kind of thin, sort of psychotropic landscape kind of feel, like Glastonbury does. And there's the story of Merlin and
Yes.
the red and white dragons underneath the hill doing battle forever. And some people would say that's the the Brythonic kind of, and the Anglo-Saxons and the Welsh fighting it forever and things like that. But I don't think it's that. I think it's this ever rolling, for want of a better way of explaining it, I would say it would be like a kind of a yin and yang kind
Mm,
of energy, or perhaps the two dragons on the Caduceus, the kind of the
yeah.
two mixing together makes something greater than itself.
Absolutely. Yes.
So that's, I don't feel like I've ever come to a fixed conclusion about dragons and that alchemical process within us, that by engaging with this stuff, I don't feel like I've got a sense of an end result in my,
No.
other than a greater and greater and greater respect and gratitude for the magnitude of kind of visionary experience and the magnitude of reality. It's just expanded and expanded and expanded for me so far. I've been quite hesitant to kind of go, this is the fixed system, you do this and then you do that
Yeah.
and you get that. If anything, my experiences have led me to kind of every time something gets fixed to throw it out instead,
Yes.
for me personally.
Yeah, I
I'm
have
quite
found that.
hesitant of kind of, this is this, especially with dragons. I think it's beyond my understanding, and I'm all right with that. I've got a sense of awe instead, and I'm all right with that. That's good for me. But I feel like what I can observe in myself and in the landscape and in our mythology is this two different forces working together creates something greater than itself.
Mm.
And somewhere in that, I think, is the spiritual process that you're talking about, and perhaps then the spiritual process that I'm talking about. But I'm hesitant to define it more than that, because I feel
Mm.
like as soon as you define it, you shrink it down.
Well, it's very fairy, isn't it? That,
Yeah,
you go to grasp it, but then, it
yeah,
turns into something else, or is no longer there. And I think that that's kind of that's what all of this is about, that we need to
yeah,
become more comfortable with that, and not kind of
yeah,
set things in stone or decide that things are exactly one way or the other, but they are, both and, which is,
yes,
it ties into the sort of psychotherapy studies that I'm looking at too, really. So, it all kind of
mm,
comes together in the end, but you can't sort of force it with your will or your logic. You
yeah,
have to feel it, and you have to live it, and you have to be guided. And that is how things are revealed. It's not
yeah,
something that you can take on and say, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how it's going to look at the end.
exactly.
What one person said to me recently, who was kind of it was sort of tied into this dragon experience that I had. They said that once, dragons were a part of the land, as in the universe, and maybe that's the kind of understanding of the both soul and spirit and things in balance. And then they were banished, and now they are returning. And so that kind of struck me at the time, and I thought, again, like you, I don't know exactly what that means, but it feels good.
Yeah,
I like that idea that there is this sense that they are, returning in some way. And I guess that is what it means for us, is that we are once again perhaps opening in a big way, en masse, to these processes that we have been shut off from,
yeah, exactly.
systematically over centuries and centuries, that we are in some ways returning to these mysteries.
I think, like you
Yeah,
said at the beginning, the idea of kind of Christianity and kind of monotheism, these ideas about good and evil,
yeah,
that can be very, very limiting.
absolutely.
And I
Yeah.
think as we detach from that, it doesn't mean to say that we leave behind any kind of moral compass. I think, in fact, perhaps our moral compass can become more refined
Mm,
rather than less.
yeah, yeah,
When we come to a more compassionate place in ourselves and our view of the world, we can actually become more moral,
yeah.
but perhaps less black and white about how we view things, you know. So I think it's like we could gain something far better, far greater by detaching from these kind of quite limiting constructs that we've all got culturally. You know, I wasn't raised Christian at all, but nonetheless, we live in that culture. We live with these rules and these expectations and these kind of tendencies to kind of break off from experiencing something that we don't understand.
Mm,
You
mm.
know, we kind of, oh, fairies are bad, all these kind of things, and they are dangerous, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad, you
No,
know.
yeah, they nature itself, it's not sort of setting out to be good
Exactly.
or bad. It just is. And
Yeah.
perhaps that sort of, in a sense, that the sort of closing off is the illnesses that in our society, because there are parts of our society and ourselves that we just can't bear to look at, and so it gets
Yeah.
buried. And that's
Yeah.
when things get really tricky, if we're
Yeah.
trying to pretend that they don't exist.
Yeah.
um,
Exactly.
I think this kind of reawakening and the work that you and I are doing, and sort of opening to these sorts of ideas, and in our own way, is, aiding that rediscovery
Yeah.
for people. That I think the kind of reemergence of fairy in the last number of years, say sort of 5, 6 years, has been quite profound. And I think
Mm.
that's kind of marks, it shows that something is happening.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's really exciting to see, the work that you're doing with your books. Which
Oh,
which
thank
is
you.
the latest book that you are about to release? Because you
Gosh. Well, yeah. So the Oracle deck came out last winter.
yeah.
Celtic Goddesses, Witches, and Queens. That was a real treat to write, actually. Um, I'd never written an Oracle deck before, and I really enjoyed it. It was really
Mm,
lovely. I kind of aimed for it to be a kind of a devotional tool, really, to help us connect, and that balance between what we can really know, like what does the literature say? What does the archaeology say? What does the
mm,
folklore say? What does the name mean? and and how we can engage with that on a more spiritual
mm,
level. I really enjoyed putting those two together.
yeah.
But I've also got a small book on Ceridwen coming out
Oh,
in
fantastic.
November. That's really working purely with the sources for the Ceridwen and Ceridwen's initiation with Taliesin, um, and the kind of forerunners of that folkloric tale. Kind of Ceridwen's cauldron and Taliesin kind of getting burnt from the cauldron and becoming Taliesin, basically becoming an
Wow.
enlightened being, as an initiatory process again.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
deep dive into that mythological process from that folkloric tale, a bit like the Gwyn Neath one, with a few kind of tips about
Hmm.
connecting with Ceridwen and little bits and pieces that we can do to kind of guide people in, but also like an unpacking of what we know about her as a being.
Yeah.
Um, because I feel like that can be really useful. It's important to learn from people who've come before. We
Sure.
should if we can. That's my view anyway. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't come from that place and continue our own explorations. So I'm quite, yeah, it's been another book about initiation, really.
Mm.
with writing about Cerridwen. And then my very latest one is coming out next summer, which is all about cottage folk magic, basically.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
cunning folk fairy faith, but
Yeah.
based around applying old spells and old folkloric techniques and things to living in your home and your landscape, your local. Wild magic was very much out on the land, and this is very
Mm.
much hearth and home
Oh my
stuff.
goodness, I can
Yeah.
feel the excitement. That is,
I've
I
really
think
enjoyed
it,
it. It's been lovely. Kind of, I put in sort of so many kind of old spells and things like this that I could find, and old Gaelic charms and translations and things that, because I feel like we could adapt that kind of stuff as well. It's
yeah.
it's it's again, it's kind of history from below, really. It's kind of
Mm.
our roots as magical practitioners and things like that is kind of,
Yeah.
how people have always done things, is found it useful, adapted it to serve their uses, and carried
Yeah.
on from there. So I've had great fun writing that one. I've really been quite pleased to do that. And
That must have been a journey. And this is us connecting back in with our ancestors
yeah,
too. This is, getting in a sense of that, at least the way that our ancestors used to live as part of the land,
mm,
and recognizing the divinity in that too. That,
yeah,
some things I was reading about in particularly in this particular guy in Cornwall, John Harris, the poet.
yes, yeah,
And I love reading about the way that, his family, particularly at one point, his grandmother, she's going through real deep trauma, and she goes out onto the land and she calls to the land, she calls to the environment that she and her ancestors have been living on. And that to her was just as important as going to church. It felt the
yeah,
same, right? And at one
yeah,
point, of course, going to church replaced that which you sought in the
yeah,
landscape. But,
yeah.
we
Oh, but
really,
did it?
yeah. Well, yeah,
I mean, I'm
yeah,
doing my PhD
exactly.
on just that at the minute, and it's quite
Ah,
interesting. I'm in a kind of
yeah.
debate with my supervisors about um, church attendance and all the letters about people, complaining about parishioners not attending church, or attending church and falling asleep,
Oh, great. Oh, I
or attending
recognize that.
church and actually just getting drunk in the churchyard.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
because they're told by
So,
the landlords you have to attend. You know,
okay.
we own your land, you owe us rents, and you must be good Christians that attend church. So they attend church drunk. And things like this. And what if you asked them, in times past, say 17th century Scotland, say,
Yeah.
are you a Christian? Of course I'm a Christian. You're a Christian. And then get them to unpack what that means. And they know next to nothing about Christianity at all. And often the mass or something will be in Latin and they're not following it. They don't
Yeah.
know the first thing about it. But when
Mm,
they're in trouble, they go to the wise woman.
mm.
They don't go to the priest. You know.
That's
So
fascinating. God, that's
so
great that
we
you're,
have this idea
yeah.
of this kind of black and white Christianity replaced the old ways. And I don't think it's that simple. But I haven't even finished that exploration. I haven't come to a fixed opinion about that. But church attendance historically has often been far lower than you realise.
Oh, yeah.
I
I,
was
I
quite
mean,
amazed at, like, wow, really? And this is when people were pressurized to go to church as opposed to now. I mean, Christianity's got its gifts as well for those people who it resonates for.
mm,
But it's interesting what we mean by that kind of stuff.
I'd
Yeah.
love to read this dissertation because I'm so
Few years, yeah.
interested.
Few years, yeah.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. And with the, you're sort of talking about a lot of your books do introduce people to ways that they can experience landscape and connect with these beings. Do you have any kind of advice for somebody that might be feeling that connection with Gwyn Neath? And I guess the initial answer to this is going to be that you should kind of follow your own intuition. And if you are already being called, then you know it and you can follow that. But would you have any specific sort of advice or ideas for people that are interested in Gwyn Neath, and where and what they might be able to do, or what kind of landscapes they might want to seek out in
Yeah.
order to have this kind of initial, here I am, and I want to
Mm,
learn more, you know,
yeah.
with
Well,
him.
absolutely. I
Mm.
think there's two ways where you can navigate your interactions with fairy that work really well, in my experience. And that's full of limitations and caveats, but in my experience,
Mm.
one is being really present and trusting your intuition. And the other, contradictorily, is being able to question what your head is saying and what you're actually picking up. And to help that process, I use traditional law. So you can gain so much knowledge from folklore, especially because that's other people's ways of encountering these issues and how they unpack it. So I kind of tend to find that those things can balance out, because we need to get past our own inner dialogue if we're going to have a genuine dialogue with something beyond us. So there has to be something very present about what we're doing. And if we can gain the knowledge of others that have come before us, that really helps put us on a nice sturdy footing. But for places on the land, once you've done a bit of that, or at the same time as that, liminal places, really, places in the wild ideally, but also, times of dawn and dusk and things like that. Liminal places in the day, liminal points in your life, places where you're on the edge of things. So the garden gate is another excellent place for that kind of thing.
Very good, yeah.
That kind of stuff, or the hearth as well. That's another traditional liminal space in the home.
Yes.
But also out in the landscape, there's no replacement for being out in the landscape, really. But there's an old, and I won't get this exactly right because I just speak it in my own way these days, but there's an old charm from medieval Wales about specifically addressing Gwyn Neath when you enter the woods.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and it's to the king of the fairies and his queen. Please may I enter your sacred enclosure, your sacred abode? Please may I enter your forest, or something like that. Yeah. It's in the book, actually.
It
And
is.
whenever I teach it, I
Yes.
write it down. But when I practice it, I don't worry about getting it exactly
No.
right. And I don't see why anybody else has to get it exactly right. But go to a liminal space and address him. Don't address him in your head. Speak it,
From the heart.
from the heart. And then it doesn't matter about getting the words right.
No,
You're
exactly.
communicating with something beyond yourself.
Yeah.
It's not just internal dialogue and your own inner workings that's going on here. You're encountering something beyond yourself. If I was to say, hi, Joe, I wouldn't just go and say it in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, if I came along, I wouldn't come along with too many expectations about what Joe seemed like to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would look you in the eye and I'd go, how's Joe today?
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
the same with that, with the
Mm.
spirits of any kind, and you'll get much further. So there's nothing better than going at dusk to the edge of the woods and addressing him and asking him, because traditionally he's the king of the forest as well,
Yeah.
especially in Wales, and asking him, please may I enter these woods tonight? Please may I encounter you? And speaking honestly and truly and as yourself, but also really being aware of getting beyond your head. So you're listening to your inner guidance, but you're also aware that you can get caught in your own head if you're not careful. So you do something to moderate that. This is the same as you would if you were meeting anybody else. It's an important thing to remember that these beings, certainly in my view, are real.
Yes.
They are their own intelligences. They're not just there in service of us. And we gain so much more when we become more aware of things beyond ourselves. That's really enriching in my view. So I would just anywhere liminal and really speak to them, but especially Gwyn Neath. And that takes a bit of courage, but that courage
Yes.
is always repaid. That's respected and valued. That's my view anyway. There's plenty of others, I'm sure. That's just my way.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're, putting this out there for people. And you're right that sometimes we get ourselves in a bit of a twist and thinking, oh, we know what's the right way to do something. And actually it's working with intent, as you say. I found that the call to the King of the Spirits and his
Thank
Queen,
you.
Gwyn Neath, you who are yonder in the forest, for the love of your mate, permit me to enter your dwelling.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a really fantastic book, and I would highly recommend people if they want to kind of learn more about Gwyn Neath. And I would really love if you could, come back on as well, so we can talk about wild magic
Oh, I'd love to.
and the journeys that are possible within that too, because there's a lot there. But also, congratulations on your new endeavors,
Thank
and
you.
good luck with your PhD too. Because
I might need it.
I know, well, I need to talk to you more about that. So I think it would be great, to have you back on
Well, it's lovely to be here.
for more chats because there's
Really
a
lovely to
lot
connect.
to get through, and I think there's a lot to learn too. So thank you for everything that
Oh,
you're
thank you for
doing.
having me. I love chatting with you. It's great. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's been
I feel like I've
brill.
learned a lot from you as well.
Well, thank you. And do you have a best place for people to contact you, buy your books, and
Yeah,
generally
yeah.
catch up
I'm
with what
quite
you're doing?
Googleable. I've got a website, danuforest.co.uk, and I'm available. I can be found on Facebook and Instagram. I have not yet ventured into the world of TikTok,
No,
but I
nor
can
me.
be found quite straightforwardly out in the world. So yeah, and I welcome anyone getting in touch. It's always lovely to hear people's experiences, especially about
Excellent.
Gwyn. I feel like that's a real sacred duty of mine is to I'm sure I'm one of many, 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 but to I don't even know represent in the world, but to remind people that he's out there and of these
Yeah.
traditional ways of connecting with him and knowledge that we have about him and how that can inform people's experiences, I think is really important. What he teaches is really invaluable, I think, at this time. So thank you
It
very much for inviting me to speak about it.
Thank you. It very much feels of this time, and I think we're lucky to have you here as well, particularly, you know, at in Glastonbury. And if you are going to be doing any courses or workshops or talks or
Yeah,
anything like that, let us know
yeah,
because I know lots of people who'd be interested to
yeah.
follow that and come along.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, I do
Yeah,
teach two online courses continuously for years now, and I take
excellent.
apprentices occasionally when I've worked with them for a while in various forms. So there's
Wow.
lots of ways to connect with me.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I'm looking forward to opening that up a little bit more now. Now I've
Yeah.
caught up with a few things, and I've kind of got a few. I started a couple of years ago with a long list of stuff and books and contracts that I had to fulfill.
Mm.
And I'm finally getting on top of things again, which is fantastic, So yeah, I'll be doing more in town as well, and out on the land in various places too. I often teach in Avebury and in Wales as well. So
Oh, excellent. Well, I'd like to come and join for one of those. So
I'd love
yeah,
to have you.
yeah. And I'll let people know, as and when those are happening. So yeah,
Oh, thank you.
uh,
Thank you very much.
have a great day
You
and
too.
yeah, speak again soon.
Yeah. Okay. Take care.